All right, today we're jumping into one of the biggest, most challenging questions in all of theology. We're going to use our source material to really unpack the logic behind a concept that, let's be honest, a lot of people find really hard to square.
So at the very heart of this whole thing is what feels like this massive contradiction, right? It's a fundamental question about how God's love and God's justice can possibly coexist.
And here's the question you've probably heard or maybe even asked yourself 1,000 times. How can a loving God send people to hell? I mean, for a lot of people, this is a major stumbling block to faith, because on the surface, infinite love and eternal punishment just seem like they can't both be true.
But here's where it gets interesting. The Catholic approach to answering this doesn't start by defending the question as it's asked. Instead, it begins with a really surprising clarification that totally reframes the entire debate.
So get this, from this theological viewpoint, the real issue isn't about God being cruel. The entire argument pivots away from that and puts the focus squarely on human freedom. It's about the dignity of our choice.
And that leads us right into the first pillar of this argument, the idea that freedom is the very thing that makes love possible in the first place. This is the bedrock, the absolute foundation for everything else we're about to explore.
The logic here is actually pretty simple when you break it down. Real, authentic love just can't be forced. I mean, for your yes to God to mean anything at all, you have to have the genuine ability to say no.
And think about the alternative for a second. If you take real freedom out of the equation, what are you left with? Well, love just becomes coercion. Holiness isn't a virtue, it's just programming. And heaven? It's not a freely chosen union. It's a compulsion. You're forced to be there.
And hey, this isn't some New Age theological twist. If you look at the Gospel of Matthew, you see Jesus himself presenting these two destinies as parallel outcomes. Notice how symmetrical that verse is. He talks about eternal life and eternal separation in the exact same breath, as two sides of the same coin of choice.
Okay, so if hell is a result of our choices, how is it actually defined? Well, the Catechism of the Catholic Church has a very specific way of framing it, and it all comes down to the idea of self-exclusion.
And there it is. Hell is a state of definitive self-exclusion from communion with God and the blessed. The phrase that really matters there, the one to zero in on, is self-exclusion.
The Catechism goes on to explain that this separation is what happens when someone dies without repenting and accepting God's merciful love. And then it adds the most important part. This happens by our own free choice.
And that phrase, man, that's everything. By our own free choice. That is the absolute core of this whole argument. In this view, hell isn't some place God angrily sends people to. It's the final, logical destination of a path the soul has already freely chosen for itself.
Okay, so you can probably see how this creates a kind of tension, right? How do you hold all these ideas together? God's incredible mercy, His perfect justice, and our own profound, powerful freedom to choose. Let's dive into that.
So on the one hand, the teaching is crystal clear. As it says right there in 1 Timothy, God wills that all men be saved. His desire for everyone to be in union with Him is universal, no exceptions. But, and this is the huge but, that offer of mercy is an invitation. It's not a demand. And any real invitation, by its very nature, has to have the possibility of being refused.
You know, the great writer C.S. Lewis had this incredibly powerful way of putting it. He wrote, "The doors of hell are locked from the inside." It's just such a perfect, memorable image for this idea of a definitive, willful turning away from God. Now, let's zoom out a bit and look at the bigger philosophical picture here. The idea of living in a universe that actually matters. This part of the argument is all about why the possibility of hell is seen as necessary for reality to be morally serious. It really forces us to ask a tough question. If there's no final accountability, do our choices really mean anything in the long run? Do they lose their ultimate weight and seriousness? And this is the logic behind that. The concept of a final judgment is what gives ultimate meaning to our existence. It says that our choices really, truly matter. It says evil is a real thing with real consequences. It says that victims matter, that justice matters, and ultimately that our freedom matters so much it has eternal significance. Here's another way to think about it. At the end of a person's life, God doesn't suddenly step in and reverse the course they've been on. Instead, He simply confirms the direction a soul has freely and consistently embraced all along. It's the destination they were already heading toward. So we can really boil this entire argument down to one powerful statement that just ties it all together. Love without freedom is not love, and freedom without real consequences is not dignity. It perfectly connects all the dots we've been talking about: love, freedom, meaning, and consequence.
And this brings us all the way back to where we started, but now looking through a completely different lens. From this perspective, a loving God isn't one who forces his will on us. He's one who honors our freedom so profoundly, so respectfully, that he allows for even its most tragic possibility, the definitive, free, and final rejection of love itself.